interviewing these days has taken on a whole different genre. It seems like I know it seems like the pharmaceutical companies were doing more with the virtual interviewing, and I think moving forward we're just going to see a lot of different industries out there that are just going to make that more standard practice. So my question is, any kind of recommendations now that you give to candidates regarding the basic interview prep for for interviewing? And this could be for virtual interviewing or face-to-face.
Sure. First, I would say be familiar with whatever the platform is that if you get invited to an interview, go out and become familiar with the platform. If it's a Zoom, go out and click and kind of navigate that system to see what it's like. You also want to prepare just like you would prepare for a regular interview. You want to make sure you dress the part. You want to prepare questions for the interviewer. You want to prepare responses to frequently asked questions. You want to go out and take a look at what some behavioral questions may look like for the particular industry you're trying to get into, or you may find questions about the particular job that you're trying to get into also. Prior to the interview, you want to practice. Make sure you practice with someone that's going to take your interview practice just as serious as you are going to take that. And have them give you feedback about your body language, eye contact, handshake, those types of things. The day of the interview, you want to arrive early, especially if it's a virtual interview, or even if it's a phone interview. Just to take a moment to talk a little bit about the phone interview. I've had customers tell me, why should I dress the part? It's a phone interview. But we all know on the panel, the way you're dressed comes across in your tone of voice. So we encourage folks to dress the part. If you're going to participate in a virtual interview, log on about 10 minutes early and make sure that you are ready to go. Test out your equipment, test out your headset, make sure you can hear what they're saying on the other end. So go through and test it out. Once you receive that message that says you are scheduled for a virtual interview, ask them if you can have an opportunity to go in and practice. And I would encourage you to do that. Have your questions ready to go. Make sure you do not leave that interview without asking the employer or the hiring manager or the recruiter, whoever is interviewing you. Make sure you do not leave that interview without asking questions.
Make sure the equipment works.
Absolutely, make sure the equipment works.
Al, I have a quick question for you. Does the Workforce Center offer any type of free laptops, or not free laptops, but where they can come in and conduct their virtual interviews? Say they don't have any access to devices. Can the center provide things like that? I believe Mount Carmel does that already, and I'd have to think that the Workforce Center does. But what?
So currently, prior to COVID-19, Kevin, we actually had an opportunity for individuals who are going to have an interview, for them to actually come in and sit and do a mock interview with us. Right now, we are working on a way to do that virtually with individuals, where they will call in and have a conversation with someone, and we go through the practices with them. As soon as we get that up and running, we will let the public know on our Facebook page or on our website how they can access that information.
Awesome. Sarah, a question that I have for you on this, we're talking about interviewing. Do you spend a lot of time with the virtual process now when you are initially talking to candidates? Are you just doing primarily phone, or are you incorporating the virtual element into the interview and screening?
All right. So kind of both. So at T-Mobile, we've done video interviews for our first round of interviews for years. And we've always, had the in-person model for our final interview, but now, like so many other employers, we're considering moving into virtual interview space and what that looks like. So for any of you out there, if you get that invitation for a virtual interview, I would say give yourself some grace. Chances are really good that the hiring manager or the recruiter, whoever's on the other end, is probably new at doing this too. So it's a little bit awkward and uncomfortable for everybody right now in this new space until we all get used to this new landscape that we're living and working in. So I think as people, just as Al said, just give yourself some time, make sure you're prepared. I think a lot of nerve comes from people, what are they going to think of me on camera? How do I look? So I would just say, your background there, Kevin, is perfect. It's a plain black plain background. So if you're setting up for a virtual interview at home, do the same thing. Try and face your camera on a blank wall. Don't give the person something to stare at, because it's human nature. If someone's talking, you kind of tend to look at what's around them. But as an interviewer, you want their focus to be 100% on what you're saying and what value you have to come to their company. So don't give them any distractions. So make sure your background's set around you. Eye contact is so important because, as humans, where that's the way we're set up to work on it with eye contact. And you can't do that when you're virtual. I can't make direct eye contact with you, but I can look straight into my camera, and that gives the person on the receiving end the feeling that I'm looking straight into their eyes. So I would definitely say look straight into your camera. It's a little awkward to talk into your camera and sell yourself, but it conveys that sincerity and honesty, and that's going to come through to the person who's doing some interviewing with you. So practice that. If you need to, set up some Zoom calls with your friends and family and run through conversations with them ahead of time. There's nothing that says you can't role play a virtual interview the same as you would role play an in-person interview. So I would talk about that. And then Al, I think, had touched on this, the same thing, attire. Dress for success. If you would wear a suit to go into their office for an interview, wear a suit for a virtual interview, wear a suit for the phone interview, because it just makes you feel more confident in your answers. I think, we've all gotten used to, if you're working from home or you're unemployed, staying at home, it's easy to be casual, but when you're on that interview, you want to make sure that you're dressing for the position that you want, so that it comes across that you're eager for that role.
I'm going to put you on the spot here for just a smidge. I touched base on this on my show a couple of weeks ago, is the methodology behind why these interview questions are even being asked. Gee, why are they asking me that? Could you just touch base really quick? If somebody says, if they're asking a candidate the question of, give me that, the time when you had this bad experience and how did you overcome it? In your opinion, what do you think is the rationale as to why these companies are even asking these kind of questions? They do seem pretty standard and they incorporate the STAR methodology, but is there any other insight that you can share on why these questions are even being asked?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of it is companies want to see, if you're going to fit with their culture, because culture is extremely important to most companies, and how you handle yourself in certain situations. So, we see it a lot where people will come in and we set up all of our interview questions. They're all behavioral based. So we're not going to ask us, um, you know, we're not going to ask you yes, no questions. We want them to be fully open-ended. We always talk about SBOs, so situation, behavior, outcome. So if we ask you a time, give me an example of a time where you had conflict at work. We really want candidates to lay out what the situation was, what their behavior was, what the behavior maybe was of their peers, and what the outcome was. And that way it tells us, how did you handle yourself in this situation? Because then we could know, okay, well, if there's conflict in our workspace, how are you likely to handle this? And I think researching the companies that you're applying for will really help you with those things. One of the questions we ask is about customer service, because customer service is the heart of everything we do. We're super passionate about it, and we want to make sure that everybody that we hire has that same passion for taking care of our customers. So if we ask you about customer service, we want you to knock it out of the park and wow us with how amazing your passion is for customer service. So when we're asking you that question, if you come in with an answer of sometimes somebody else provided you great customer service, well, that's awesome that you know what customer service is, but you didn't really answer the question. So I would say, even in a nerve-wracking situation, give yourself 2 seconds to take a breath and really think about what they're asking you and what the company's profile is, why they might be asking you that, so that you can formulate a solid answer and not just kind of rush to the gun to answer them while you're nervous.
Yeah, as a certified interview coach, one of the things I had to do in order to get certified is look at the modality of the individual asking the questions. Easier said than done when you're doing it on the phone, but I'm sure you concur with this statement. Smile when you dial, or if you're on the inbound call, you still, always smile when you're talking, because that conveys the enthusiasm, and you don't sound so monotonish too. And so I'll tell folks, even on the phone, it might sound stupid, but smile when you're talking to somebody like that. It's really, you can tell the difference, and if you're just talking like this and so forth.
Right.
Just make a difference. Cool, thanks very much, Sarah. Megan, any advice that you can give individuals on how to answer these interview questions? And I don't mean just like, here's the right answer, tell them this, but advice and insight on, how you should answer the question. Not give them the answer, but make them think about it, before they answer it, so they can form the answer that somebody like Sarah would want to hear.
Absolutely. So first off, make sure that you actually do answer the question. I can't tell you how many times we've been interviewing graduate students this week for a position in our office, and there were several times when people just didn't answer the question. I asked that there is a reason. So it's going back to that, reflecting on the job description. Make sure before the interview you've reviewed the job description. Like if you're applying for jobs, make sure you save that job description, because sometimes it's pulled down off the website and you won't be able to find it again. So make sure you have access to it so you can go back through and review the job description, and then you can kind of understand, to Sarah's point, like, why is Sarah asking about customer service? Because it's a customer service role. And so you should probably think a little bit in advance of maybe sometimes when you offered really good customer service, maybe when you failed to offer good customer service and what you learned from that. So you can do a lot of prep work in advance and think about some scenarios based on what's listed in the job description. And then practice talking about those scenarios. Just talk in the mirror, or talk to yourself, or talk to a spouse or a friend. But just really get some experience and some practice discussing, this is a situation when I had conflict and here's what happened, because you want to work out all those ums, ands, and kind of those transitions ahead of time. And you'd be surprised if you come up with like 4 or 5 different scenarios that you think, maybe a time you did really well, a time when you didn't do so well, a time you had conflict with a colleague or a boss, a time when you showed some leadership and some initiative. You can work those examples into a wide variety of questions. So if you've done a little prep work and you've researched the company, if you looked at the job descriptions, you can answer what you think they're going to ask. And then even if they ask something a little differently, you can still use that information to fully answer the question. The STAR method we talked about is good. Make sure you talk about the situation, the tasks, the action, and the results. And then what I tell people too, if the result isn't good, because the result isn't always good, right? And sometimes they'll specifically ask you to talk about a time you failed. So the result is not a good result. Make sure you talk about how you learned, or what you learned and how you grew from that experience, and what you would do differently next time. So sometimes there's a little added bit after the STAR method where you can really talk about personal growth and reflection. That can be helpful as well. But it all goes back to kind of figuring out why they're asking the question, how it relates to the job, so that you can answer it in the best way possible. You can get that answer that they're looking for. I also want to just say one quick thing about interview questions in terms of illegal interview questions. So I don't think that employers are malicious in asking illegal questions all the time. I don't think they're trying to discriminate against you or actively trying to gain knowledge they shouldn't have. But job seekers should be aware that like any question related to your gender, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, or any kind of family, any kind of personal information, you don't have to share that in an interview. And if they ask you a question, I mean, we see it a lot casually where it's, kind of like a little back and forth, just small talk, where it's like, oh, great, tell me about your family. You don't have to disclose that information. Or if they ask you a question in an interview that asks about, like, do you have any physical disabilities? They shouldn't be asking that. You can ask, can you tell me how that relates to the duties of the job? And it might come out like, well, we need you to be able to lift 50 pounds. That's a different question. Saying, can you lift 50 pounds is a different question than, do you have a physical disability? You shouldn't have to disclose that. So the best way to approach those is, if you're asked kind of an illegal question, anything personal, you can ask, how does it relate to the job? And then answer the question as it relates to that position. Like, yes, I can lift 50 pounds. Or, we see like, oh, I know you have kids. This person's probably not going to be able to travel if they have small children at home. That's not something that the employer should be considering. The question should be, are you able to travel 50% of the time? And then you can answer, yes, I am. and you don't have to get into like family obligations and things like that. So just protect yourself when you're out there in interviews, and understand that there are some illegal questions and you don't have to disclose that information.
Megan, thank you for bringing that up, because we call it the 7 deadly sins of interview questioning. And you're right, there are a lot of individuals out there that don't really realize they're asking a question that, legally that job seeker doesn't have to answer. But something else too I want to add really quick, and now I'm going to jump on to Rich to wrap this up. But really quick too, as far as the objective goes of, it's okay, and they want you to demonstrate, a situation and how you had to overcome it, or a flaw. But I always tell my clients to follow up immediately with, what are you doing to try to improve on that? So if they ask you what you're weak at, be candid about it. But at the same time, explain to them right after that, this is what I'm working on to try to improve it. So at least that you're cognizant, and it also sounds more authentic in your answer. So Rich, when you're working with a lot with military and veterans, what kind of advice do you have in terms of, the follow-ups after the interviews? Or do you find that you have to prepare service members and vets a little differently for the interviewing process?
One, we tell them they need to practice, because coming out of the military, a lot of the acronyms and terminology and being stiff like they're in a board or something like that, we've got to tell them that they've got to get more comfortable and make it a conversation, not necessarily a firing squad. So that's the first thing. Second is, we tell them, do your job, do good in the interview, and ask the questions, and when you're done, be prepared to send those thank you letters to the individuals to thank them for their time, because you never know. Some people don't send thank you letters and they may never get reached out to. Some people send a thank you letter, and now they're, let me think about that individual. If I ever have another job that comes up, they could be my first runner-up. So really keeping them just teaching them that it's going to be different. It's no different than when they came in the military. You didn't know everything that you learned in the past 20 years overnight. So now it's the same thing. It's going to take time. You're going to have to practice at it. But we're all here willing to help. And if we don't have the resource, we get them connected to the resource that can help them.
Very good. Very good. This question, I guess, is for everybody. Getting back to the thank you, in the follow-ups after you've had an interview, what's your take on just simply sending out a quick email or sending it in a LinkedIn inbox? And Sarah, especially, I want to kind of direct this question to you. Do you find that it's in bad form to just send a quick email thank you, or a LinkedIn inbox thank you? Or do you really think in this day and age, typing out something and putting a stamp on it is still, something to be, showing a lot more initiative?
Again, I kind of think it depends on the level of position and maybe what industry you're in. So when I applied for this job at T-Mobile, I had a panel interview, and I wrote handwritten thank you notes to all the people that interviewed me and took it to their center, because I'd met with them in person. By that point in time, I'd spent several hours with them interviewing, and I felt that was appropriate. When people interview for our jobs, I think it's great when we get an emailed thank you. I would just say, again, like your resume and your cover letter and any other communications that you have, if you're going to send a thank you note, make sure, it doesn't need to be a formal letter by any means, but make sure it says, who you're intending it to go to and is written well in the way that you would want to convey yourself, not just like a text message that you might send your friend. But I think thank you notes are so undervalued and always, always appreciated.
I would jump in on the thank you notes too, and just say, like, thank you notes can also be a chance to kind of come back from an interview question that maybe you didn't do so great at. So if you remember, if you totally bombed the interview, a thank you note's not going to help you a whole heck of a lot. But if there was one question that maybe you didn't address fully, or that you think you could have answered a little bit better, in your thank you note, like, we had a candidate do this for a job one time where we asked a diversity question. we always have some type of diversity question, and he didn't feel that he answered the diversity question that well. And so he sent a thank you note and was just like, and I wanted to loop back about that diversity question and really clarify what I meant by that. And it was his saving grace. He did end up making it to the next round, because we were just like, oh, okay, that's what he was trying to say in the interview. So it is your opportunity to kind of come back from a question that maybe you didn't answer so well. But if you can also kind of personally connect through the thank you letter and maybe reiterate something that made you really unique, or maybe you had a side conversation where you both really, maybe you're talking to the interviewer and you both really had interest in hiking or something, and you could say, like, hey, here's some really great trails that you should check out, or like anything that you can do to make the interviewee or interviewer remember you as an interviewee, will help as they're evaluating candidates too.
Awesome. I think now that we have the final 10 minutes for Q&A on interviewing, Emma, do we have any questions for anyone out there?
We do have some questions. One is, what are some good types of interview questions to ask the interviewer?
Well, I always believe in transparency, and if you are doing your homework, reviewing the company first, you should be able to formulate some pretty good questions. One that I might want to ask is, how up to date are they in terms of technology, and what type of systems are they using, as far as helping to streamline a process would be one. It shows initiative, and also a willingness to say, hey, either I can do this or I'm willing to learn. But usually, the technology involved or software or platforms, I think, would be a great question to ask an interviewer.
I would also, oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say another good question is, if you do your research on the company and you see that that company has a new project about to take way in the next couple of months or whatever, and you ask them, based off the research, knowing that this company has this project, what part do we have in that role, or something of that nature? Just showing that you've done your research on the organization and the growth of that company. Those are good questions.
And I was going to add, if you're not quite clear from the job posting or in any of your research, whether or not you will be working in a team setting, I would also pose that question too, whether you'll be working in a team setting.
And I think if they didn't already address it at some point in the interview, I think it's 100% fair to ask when they would be making a decision. And I think that helps clarify for you. We had talked earlier in this, is it okay to call the recruiter or the hiring manager and ask what the status is? I think that lets you know what a reasonable timeline is, so that if you don't hear during that time, you can reach out. You may think that you should hear something back in 24 hours, but if you're the first person they're interviewing and they still have 10 people to interview, it may be 2 weeks before they can even make it through the interview process. So I think that helps you manage expectations up front about when you should hear back.
Anyone else? Any more questions?
Yeah. What are some signs that an interview went well?
Well, they call you back for a second interview. I've been on both ends of this, and you may go in there thinking, wow, I really nailed it, and then you find out you're getting an email saying, thanks again, but we're going to move forward with another candidate, and it can be pretty demoralizing. I have found that if they're really interested in you, they're probably going to get back to you sooner rather than later. But I also think that this goes back to the modality that I use. And again, kind of hard to gauge when you're on the phone, but if you're in the virtual or face-to-face, believe it or not, that hiring manager will convey, I believe, some social cues as well. Do they seem like they're really engaged? I've been in interviews with individuals where the hiring manager starts by yawning, and you're like, gee, I'm sorry, was this really that boring? But I don't know if they think, what the protocol is, but I found that to be very rude. So I think the engagement and maybe how they're answering your questions is one sign. And the other thing is that how long did the interview last? If it lasts longer, generally they're going to, be more interested, or they get a cutoff where they say, okay, we know this person's not going to get through the next round. Let's just wrap it up. So I think the longer they spend on an initial interview, I think is better. Sarah can answer that question too, I think, better than I can.
It's hard to say because we try to give everybody a great interview. So before all of this, I would say our in-person interviews for everybody, whether they're going to get the job or not, typically last about 2 hours because we really want to take time to get to know you and get over that. The first 30 minutes, you're just nervous. Everybody's nervous. So we want to give you some time to just calm down and really get to know us and see our facility and make sure that we're going to be a good fit for you as much as you're going to be a good fit for us. So I think it's hard to say because a lot of times you do think you nailed it in an interview, and then it is disappointing when you get that notification that you weren't selected. And I think, I've been through that situation myself too. It's heartbreaking, especially if you thought you had a great interview. But I would say to keep in mind is that a lot of times people are hiring for 1 or 2 positions. So maybe you did nail it. Maybe you were amazing and they really liked you, but 5 other people were amazing and they really liked them too. So just because you didn't get this one, it might mean that they call you back in a year or 2 and say, hey, you were a finalist last time and didn't make it. Are you still in the job market? I know, quite a few times that happens. So I would say if you think you nailed it and you didn't get selected, don't be discouraged because it might open up doors for you still in the future.
Yeah,
I would also, sorry, I'd piggyback on that too and just say, like, they won't always answer this question, but you can always ask, is there something that I could have done better? Or what you can ask for feedback from your interviews. And sometimes, to Sarah's point, it will be like, actually, we just had somebody more qualified. Like, I'm sorry, it was just, you actually did really, really well. But it's something that I've done when interviewing personally, and I tell job seekers do it too. Just ask the question. They might not answer you. Some companies won't answer that question, but they might, and then you might be able to get some really good information about what you can do better in the future. So don't be afraid to ask, but just don't push the issue, because some companies have HR policies where they're not going to give you feedback on any of it, but some would be willing to do that.
Very good. Does anyone else have any insight on that? No? Do we have any other questions? I think I saw one pop up.
Is it best to wait until the end of the interview to ask your questions, or can questions be asked throughout the interview to make the interview more conversational?
Well, I always think that, if you've got some of these questions already written out, or if one should pop up during that time, I mean, if it's relevant during the course of that interview, then I think it's very conversational to ask it. Some individuals tend to not be so, multitasked in a sense that they might want to wait until the end to start asking the questions because they want to make sure they're asking it correctly and they're really understanding the answer. I personally think it depends on the flow of the interview and how relevant that question is during that particular time that they're talking. So it can really go either way. But generally, it's kind of one of those things where, the tone of the interview and how it's going and how conversational it is, I think, plays a huge part.
I love conversational interviews. I actually think it's a sign that the interview is going well. To Emma's point, if it's more of a conversation, it's typically a better interview. But I would say just make sure you ask, because they might be on a really tight timeline. So if they say they only have 30 minutes to interview you, just make sure that you be mindful of the time and respectful of their time. So I would just say, you can ask, like, would you mind if I asked you a question very quickly? And if they say sure, then go for it. And they might tell you, no, you need to wait until the end. And if time permits, we'll be able to answer your question. So just ask before you ask.
Any other questions?
If you meet people who have vacancies in their company while you are out in a social setting, how do you express that you're looking for a job?
This kind of goes back to, and again, whether it's a networking setting or LinkedIn as well. You might want to reach out, and that's where a good, network comes in handy, because you may see somebody that you went to school with or that you know from another job, and you might reach out to them to say, hey, are they hiring? I personally think there's nothing wrong with, if you know an individual and they're a decision maker, and you see them in an event or a chamber event or what have you, how are you hiring right now? Is there opportunity? Can I send my resume in? The one thing I tell folks, I think legally now, no one can just accept a resume. It usually has to go through an online, process. And I know more and more companies have to follow suit with that. Back in the day, it used to be, yeah, go ahead and just give me your resume. Now I'm finding more and more that these HR managers say, no, you just can't hand that to somebody. It has to go through, a virtual protocol. So I don't know if anyone's thoughts on that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, are you guys hiring right now? Where they can tell you is yeah or no, or check back in a month or 6 months. Anyone else have anything that they want to add to that?
I agree
Yeah.
with you. I think it's spot on. It's more of that networking. If you're in an environment, just be professional about it. If you have a business card, pass it along, or definitely get their point of contact, so that maybe you can say, hey, I see that you have openings in your organization. Do you mind if I reach out to you to ask you more at a later time? Because right now is probably not the right time to talk about it. And that's it.
And that's a good point too. Pick that time when, is it the best time to actually bringing that up or not? But again, I'm going to go back again to the LinkedIn, network. See if you have individuals in your contacts that may be able to provide you, with more insight on that. I think you get a much better answer. And, moving forward, I just think that, we have to all be opportunistic. So I always encourage people to keep an eye out on postings as well. If they're truly out there, looking for a different career or a different job, I think they have to be diligent every day, not always wait for the email to come across either. Make sure that they are, and I like to use Google to actually type in specific jobs verbatim and see what pops up, because, there you're going to have all kinds of different job search engines that are going to show up on that. So, getting back to whether or not somebody's hiring or not, you don't always have to depend on the individual as well. Do a little diligence, on your own online. We got another one here.
One more question. What are your thoughts on using the free version of LinkedIn versus the upgrade to premium?
Well, I'm only a contractor for LinkedIn, so they don't pay me to be a spokesperson. But I do say that, there are programs out there, especially if you're seeking a job. I know that they have a standard premium edition that's like, I think, $29. Now, with the premium, I believe that you actually have information on a job poster. So there are benefits to having the premium edition, because sometimes on a posting, you won't see who it's posted by. Now, maybe they've changed that, but typically in the past, there were some other things on there about helping you with skill sets and so forth, and a lot of different tools that you can use to present yourself as a better candidate. But I always start by telling my clients, look, at the very least, if you're savvy enough, take the free version. If you are doing your homework and being diligent, I think that you can get just as much success out of LinkedIn, with the free services. Now, I know that there are other types of services with LinkedIn that if you're trying to network in general, that you can take advantage of. But I always tell folks, as a job seeker, try it first with the free stuff. And if you're not finding that you're getting anywhere with it, then consider a premium option. They give you 30 free days initially with a premium edition to try it out. Some individuals might find something within 30 days. But if you find moving forward that you're not getting very far, and you're using, say, the next 6 months to really be diligent, a job search, 29 bucks a month. I mean, that's a haircut,
For our military transition, we try to tell them, because we try to get them 1 year prior to getting out, they get premium, LinkedIn premium for a year for free. And so what we'll do is we'll tell them, take advantage of the free stuff first. And then when you get about 90 days prior to your separation, then go ahead and do that upgrade to the premium.